there. I'm George Washington, founding father and the first president of the United States. You may also know me as the person who set all of the United States free from that revolting brute, King George. And I can't believe he tried to put Dax on our tea. But that's not the point. The point is I'm George Washington, the person that you should all be thanking that the United States is free from Britain and their foolish king. Anyways, enough about him. This is about me. I was born in Virginia and grew up with my mother Mary and dad Augustine and 9 other siblings. I was closest with my oldest brother Lawrence. When he died, I asked the government if I could take over Lawrence's job as a general in Virginia's militia. After that, I ran Virginia's militia. I did a pretty good job if you ask me. In 1758, I was elected to the House of Burgesses. King George the Fool couldn't pay for their problem in Britain, so they started taxing us for their goods, which is partly why the Revolutionary War started. The House of Burgesses and I, it was time to change this, so we came up with an astute plan to cunningly outwit the British and destroy their tea. On December 16, 1773, we put our astonishing plan together, and at the end of this event, known as the Boston Tea Party, we threw 342 chests of tea into the Atlantic Ocean. Next, I'd like to tell you about when I was victorious at the Battle of Yorktown. It was a blustery day in 1781. The weather was cold and hail was falling. The wind was blowing in every direction. Some soldiers even wanted to quit, but quitting was an option. We bravely fought on. So there I was. I was on my horse all through the night, riding. Then finally, I saw camp. Of course, the British. I knew my soldiers were on their horses galloping right behind me. Then charge. I pointed my sword directly to the British camp. The battle lasted 3 weeks until they finally waved the white flag of surrender. Huzzah! Sorry, I still get excited when I think of our victory. Next, I would like to share a little more about my personal life. I had a wife named Martha and stepchildren. Did you know that Martha had a husband before me who died? He had a plantation called the White House, which is commonly known nowadays as the President's Home. But don't get confused. It's not the same place. They just happen to share the same name. Thank you to Martha's first husband for the name suggestion. A successful leader and my legacy as the first president of the United States of America is remembered to this day. Our present-day nation's capital, Washington, D.C., is even named after me. I would love to answer more questions, but I'm afraid I have to go see my wife and stepchildren now. It was lovely to speak. Long live American independence. Until next time.
It's the militia. Oh, hello there, fellow patriots. I am Sybil Ludington. I was born on April 5th, 1761. Not many people know that the American Revolution was helped by a 16-year-old girl, but it's true. I also have 11 siblings and a horse named Star. This is my story, and it's sure some wild ride. I was only 16 years old on April 26, 1777. It was a cold, wet, and rainy night. Then there was a sudden urgent knock at the door. It was a messenger. My father, Colonel Ludington, was very nervous. The messenger said that 2,000 British soldiers had attacked the town of Danbury. My father was so startled when he heard that. He had no idea who was going to warn his soldiers to go into action. My mother had to watch my 11 siblings. Who could deliver this important message? I wondered. Suddenly, I had an idea and said, "Wait, why can't I go?" Both my parents said, "Absolutely not. You are too young and you will be so cold out there." Then I said, "What if I put on my warmest coat and my horse Star can ride as fast as lightning?" My mother and father finally agreed, and I was so happy to help out. I quickly put on my warmest coat and got Star all saddled up, and then we were off. Star was galloping so fast that before I knew it, we were already at the first house. I announced, "Go to Colonel Ludington's house now. The British soldiers have attacked the town of Danbury. Go now. My father will tell you the rest when you arrive at my house." I knew the mission was dangerous, and I wanted to get home as quickly as possible. Instead of stopping at each house, I stopped at every few houses and asked them to warn their neighbors. Then, after a long night, me and Star returned to the woods again. Suddenly, I heard a sound. It sounded like people. I got off Star and stayed as quiet as a mouse. Just then, I spotted a group of the militia in the woods around a fire. This was what my parents were afraid of. I quickly backed away until I could get back on Star, and she started to gallop so fast that before I knew it, we were at the last house. Then I was off to ride home. A couple of weeks later, George Washington came to my house to thank me personally for what I did. I am proud to have helped my country at such a young age. I am proud of my Congress actions and achievements. Now, if you would excuse me, I am off to go feed Star. Thank you for listening to my contributions to American history. Long live America.
Proceed, great chief, with virtue on thy side, that every action let the goddess guide. A crown, a mansion, a throne that shine, with gold unfading Washington be thine. Oh my, why hello there, my fellow Americans. I was just rereading a poem I'd sent to Commander George Washington. But before I tell you the story of why I decided to write that poem, I'm going to properly introduce myself. I'm Phyllis Wheatley Peters. I was born in Senegal, West Africa in 1753 and kidnapped and taken to Boston in 1761. It was scary for a child of only 7 years old, but I was brave and managed to survive 3 months at sea. But during this time, I missed my lovely mother more than anything. I would continue to miss my old life in West Africa. In 1761, I was enslaved by Mark and Susanna Wheatley. Miss Wheatley saw what a smart young lady I was and thought it would be a good idea to teach me how to read and write. It turned out she was correct. In 1776, Commander George Washington invited me to come stay with him in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I accepted his invitation. A week later, I arrived and he greeted me in front of a massive fortress. It was very cold outside, so stepping into the warmth was quite shocking. We talked for most of my stay, and I showed him my ability to read and write. He was most impressed by my work as a skilled writer. After 2 weeks, I felt homesick and decided it would be best for me to head home. George was not fond of this idea, but he knew what it was like to be far away from home, so he paid for a boat to take me back to Mistress Wheatley. The following year, I fell in love with a man named John Peters, and we got married in 1778. I gave birth to 3 beautiful children, but sadly 2 of them died in infancy. I vowed to love my remaining child more than anything in the world, and I did. But unfortunately, I still face more hardship ahead. In 1784, my husband John went to jail because he could not pay our rent. I tried to survive, but unfortunately, me and my child passed shortly after. My writing lived on, and my poems have said to sparkle change and helped educational equality. I'm going to leave you with some final words that I wrote from my poem titled, To Thy Excellency King George. I wrote this poem to praise King George III for the repeal of the Stamp Act. May George, beloved by all nations round, live in heaven's choice contest blessing crowned. Great God, direct him from a high, and from his head let every evil fly. And may each clime of equal gladness see, a monarch's smile can set his subjects free. I hope you enjoyed my story, and long live American independence.
Hello, fellow patriots. I'm Mary Ludwig Case, but you might know me as Molly Pitcher. I was born October 13th, 1754, near Trenton, New Jersey. Later in life, I moved to Pennsylvania and married a barber named William Hayes in 1760. But perhaps what I'm most well known is for my involvement in the Battle of Monmouth. My story began with the Battle of Monmouth in New Jersey in 1778. Shortly after the battle started, my husband, William Hayes, joined the Constitutional Army. This meant he would have to leave home, but I begged him to let me come. Most women of the time were expected to stay in Valley Forge, tending to the house and children, but other women, like me, had come to watch the battle. We packed up all our things and left, and so our journey began. The male soldiers practiced and learned battle skills, while the women would make cures and food. I was helpful at all of those things. The battle began, and suddenly there were a lot of soldiers that were injured and hurt, which meant I would have to work faster. It was a long winter, and William and I thought about leaving. Months later, on June 28, 1778, I was on the battlefield, and it was extremely hot. Soldiers were fainting because of the weather, one after the other. I knew I had to do something to help. But all of a sudden, I saw my husband, William Hayes, faint next to the cannon. Oh no, the heat had gotten to him. I was so worried. Right there, in the middle of the battle, I did something drastic. I ran across the battlefield to help him. Mary, he said, surprised, you shouldn't be here. I didn't think twice about it and ran to get a picture. I filled it up with water and then ran back. But as I was getting back, I saw other soldiers faint. It was too hot and they needed water. I gave the pitcher to William. I ran back and filled it up with more water and gave it to the other soldiers, but they were still collapsing. When the soldiers saw me with the pitcher, they began to call me Molly Pitcher. Help me, Molly Pitcher, they would say. I can hear the echoes now. I ran back and forth, over and over. But then I saw the other side of the battlefield. The British were shooting, and no one was at our cannon. Can you guess what I did next? I ran to the cannon and decided to fire it. I ran across the battlefield and blast. I put up a good fight, and in the end, we won. The next morning, I was taken to George Washington to claim my prize. I was awarded gold coins for my quick thinking and bravery. It was said that the men on the battlefield had never seen anyone do the thing I did. America ended up winning the war, and I continue to share my stories. I will never forget my journey or my time on the battlefield. I am proud to say I served my country and fought for freedom. God bless America.
Hello, fellow patriots. My name is Deborah Sampson, or you may know me as a brave, independent, and courageous woman that helped win the war. Yes, you may be wondering how me, a woman, fought in the war when only men were allowed. Well, listen to my story and you will find out. I was born on December 17th, 1760 in Plimpton, Massachusetts. When I was 5 years old, my mother needed to give her 5 children away. She was sick and poor, and my father had died in a shipwreck. The next morning, I went to live with my mother's Cousin Fuller. Cousin Fuller was very kind to me. Then, one day, Cousin Fuller fell ill. Sadly, she died shortly after. I went to live with an old woman named Mrs. Thatcher. I had to do all of her housework because she was very old and in no condition to be walking all over the house. Soon, the minister of Middleborough arrived and knew I could not stay with her anymore. Later, I went to live with the Thomas family on the condition that I would work hard for 10 long years. Finally, when 10 years had passed, I decided I would become a school teacher. I was a teacher for 1 year. I enjoyed it very much, but I wanted more than that. I decided to dress up as a man and help the Patriots win the Revolutionary War. To be sure I was believable as a man, I went to see a fortune teller. She had thought I was a man. It had worked. But next, I needed to see if my mother would recognize me. But even my own mother didn't recognize me. This meant I was ready to join the army and fight for the freedom of the colonies. On May 20th, 1782, I enlisted in the American Army using the name Robert Shirtliff. Later, we were trying to steal supplies from the British. Shortly after, they caught us and chased us firing bullets. I felt something running down my neck. I realized it was blood, and I felt a sharp pain in my leg. I had been shot. I was rushed to see a doctor. I was so afraid the doctor would discover the secret identity that I was hiding. I needed to act fast. I took a pocket knife and dug the bullet out of my leg. It was very painful, but finally I had gotten the bullet out of my leg. Others had heard of my bravery as a soldier. General Patterson wanted to make me his personal orderly, a very high honor. Shortly after, a fever was going around. Eventually, I got sick and fainted. When I woke up, I realized they had discovered my secret, the one I had worked so hard to hide. The doctor told General Patterson about my secret identity. The general was in shock. I was discharged from the Army on October 23rd, 1783. I had served in the Army for about a year and a half. After the war, I married a farmer named William Gannon on April 7th, 1785. I gave birth to 3 children, 2 girls and 1 boy. I also took in baby Susanna and raised her as my own child. I was a strong, independent, and brave woman. I'm proud to say that my courage and bravery contributed to America winning the war. Long live American independence. One, 2, 3, 4. Wait, what? I'm missing 10 of my lucky marbles. Where could they have gone? Oh, hi, didn't see you there. Have you seen any of my lucky marbles? I can't find them anywhere. I'm James Fryer. My parents were free African Americans, however, my grandparents were enslaved. I was born on September 2nd, 1766 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Now let me tell you my story about a time I had to make a challenging decision, a decision that I will never forget. When I was 14, I was on the Royal Lewis to fight in the Revolutionary War and for freedom from the British King. My job was to carry gunpowder across the ship to the cannons. When we were out at sea, we realized that the British ship was chasing us. Eventually, we had to surrender. The Amphion was too strong and way bigger than us. About 20 black sailors, including me, rowed to the enemy ship to surrender and to become prisoners of the British. While on board the ship, I met Captain Bailey and his son Henry. In my free time, Henry and I played marbles and quickly became friends. After some time, Captain Bailey wanted to talk to me. When we talked, he gave me two choices. One, to go to Britain with Henry and become well educated, or two, I could stay on the ship to help fight for freedom for my country. I decided to stay on the ship. Eventually, the captain saw how crowded the ship was and told the prison guards to pick about 30 prisoners to be transferred to another ship called the Jersey. Unfortunately, I was transferred to the Jersey. While on that ship, I couldn't help but think how I'd make it out alive. As I watched people fall to the floor with disease, I refused to die in that awful place. 7 months later, I was finally freed and sent home. I began the journey to walk home to my mother. I walked all the way from New York City to Philadelphia, and half the time I was barefoot. Once I got there, I knocked on the door, and there was my mother. She was so shocked that I was finally home. She ran towards me to give me a hug. I was so excited to see her again. Huzzah! In 1783, we had finally won the war. After the war was over, I began working in my father's sail-making shop and later on owned it. My story teaches the importance of kindness, determination, and to never give up hope. I hope that one day everyone has the right to be free and treated equally. Oh no, I'm running late to a presentation in New York. Thank you and God bless America.
Here. My name is Thomas Jefferson. I wrote the Declaration of Independence and served the United States of America as Secretary of State, Vice President, and then President. I was born on April 13, 1743, in a 4-room wooden house in Virginia. I was the third oldest of 10 children. Starting from a young age, I was curious and loved to learn. I carried a notebook and pen everywhere I went and read up to 15 hours a day. I attended the College of William and Mary, where I studied law for 5 years, something that came in very useful indeed. I like to think if my father was still alive, he would be proud of me. When I was only 27, I built a little house down the block from where I grew up. I called this house Monticello, which means little mountain in Italian. There, in 1772, I married Martha Wales Skelton. In 1768, I was elected to the Virginia House of Races, and we were beginning to stand up to England. In 1775, the Revolutionary War had begun, and we were fighting to be free from British rule. 1 year into the war, I was chosen to draft the Declaration of Independence, a huge honor and responsibility. I spent 3 whole weeks in Philadelphia drafting what ended up being such a huge part of the American Revolution. I put some of my most famous words in that document. For example, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. I called on 2 friends and fellow members of the Continental Congress, John Adams and Benjamin Franklin, to help me edit my first draft. The Declaration of Independence was first read on July 4, 1776, a monumental day in American history, now known as Independence Day. 7 years later, in 1783, huzzah, we had won the war. We were free from the British and their evil king. A few years later, President George Washington asked me, yes, me, to be his Secretary of State. In 1796, I ran for president against John Adams and lost and became his vice president. 2 years later, I was elected to be the 3rd president of the United States, another great honor. I'm proud to say that I played such a monumental role in American history.
Without me, America may have not gained its independence and become the country it is today. My words continue to inspire people to fight for what they believe in and to never give up. So long for now, fellow patriots. Long live America's independence. Oh, hello. I'm Joseph Brandt. Well, my real Mohawk name is Thay Indonesia, which means he who places two bets or two stakes down bound together for strength. I was born in present-day Ohio in 1742 on the banks of the Muskingum River. My mother was a Mohawk woman, and I am a Mohawk military officer and the leader of the Haudenosaunee people. Let me share with you my story during the time of the Revolutionary War. Fair warning, it is a complicated one depending on who you ask. British settlers slowly began moving into Mohawk homelands. An English settler named Sir William Johnson was a close friend of mine and often stayed at the house of my stepfather. He was the superintendent of Indian affairs and often worked on matters between native people and settlers. I began traveling with Johnson at around 13, and I fought with him in the French and Indian War. My first battle was at Lake George in 1758. The French and Indian War lasted from 1754 to 1763, and it was fought between the British and the French over land in North America. The war began because the British were unhappy that the French settlers were expanding their territory in the Ohio River Valley. The Mohawk homelands were peaceful until the colonists came. The colonists came from France and England. Additionally, the colonists brought war to fight for Native American land. The British wanted the land as badly as the colonists did, so I decided to go all the way across the Atlantic Ocean to Britain to ask the King of Britain if they wanted to side with us, because the colonists were taking over Native American land. The British were impressed with my English. While Johnson and I were in Britain, the colonists were pushing for independence from Great Britain. We talked and talked. We never came up with an official answer, but I wanted to side with the British. The French won the war. Later on, because we remained faithful to the British cause during the American Revolution, we were given over 600,000 acres of land in exchange for our loyalty. I kept my role as captain of the British Army and continued to work as a missionary. My life was affected by European strangers who came to my homeland to start a new life. Before they arrived, I was one of the few people living in North America. My powerful leadership helped Britain gain their early advantage in the Revolutionary War. Even though they did not win in the end, let me tell you something. My story is an important one to remember, and my story is a lesson in American history and the history of the Mohawk people. Farewell, and God bless America.
Establish justice
patriots. My name is Merciotis, and I was born on September 14, 1728. Today, I'm here to tell you a tale about my life as a secret poet. I was a secret poet for a reason. In my day, people did not approve of female poets. I loved to read and write while starting at a young age. My parents had expected me to marry and keep house when I was older, but I had wanted more. Luckily, my father, who worked as a lawyer, wanted me to do more too. As I grew older, my poems were published in the newspapers. Some people wanted me to sign my name as an author, but I refused to, as I did not want to reveal my identity. My brother went off to Harvard, and I desperately wanted to go with him, but girls couldn't go to school. This upset me. My brother was very sweet, and he brought back books for me to read. I began to read John Locke's radical ideas of freedom and natural rights. I was inspired to write more and more. I met my husband James at my brother's Harvard graduation. A few years later, I had 5 children of my own. Every afternoon, I would put them down for a nap, and while they slept, I secretly wrote poems. My hands flew across the paper, writing one word after another. I found writing poetry to be very peaceful. As a patriot, I began writing poetry about our enemies, the Loyalists. I began to write Loyalists as villains and even call them funny names. When the Loyalists read my work, they clenched their fists together, mad as can be. 3 of my sons fought for our patriot cause and died. I wrote about this tragedy, saying, "The shaft flew thrice, and thrice my peace was slain." I used writing to help me through hard times. As I grew older, my secret identity as a published female writer was revealed, and more people learned that I was the poet in the newspaper. I continued to write and pursue my interests instead of following the norms for women in those days. Make sure to keep writing and let your voice be heard. I hope my story has inspired you to keep reading and writing. Good day, and thank you for listening to my story as a secret poet. It's not so secret now.
Gather around, children. Oh, hello there. I didn't see you, fellow patriots. My name is Abigail Adams. Since I'm telling my children the story of the Battle of Bunker Hill, why don't you listen in too? I was born on October 11, 1744 in Weymouth, Massachusetts. As I was growing up, Britain wasn't as forceful as they are now. There were no taxes, no fighting, and certainly no intimidating soldiers watching your every move. I eventually married John Adams. You might already know me as one of the first ladies of the United States because of John, who was the second president of this great country. For my whole life, I fought for the fair rights of women, and as the first lady, I had a platform to speak on women. Here is my story. As you probably know, there were many events leading up to the Revolutionary War. One of these events was the Battle of Lexington and Concord. Since the Patriots lost that battle, I knew I needed help in the next. I saw how uncivil and dangerous it was, and I decided I would help the soldiers train. I melted pewter utensils and molded them into fake cannonballs. It was a risky game, as British officers could have been watching. If my children, Nabby and John Quincy, were at school, I had nothing to worry about. But if they were at home, I would need to keep them in their rooms. I did that because I didn't want them to get hurt with real weapons around. They considered me overprotective, but I didn't care. They knew I was helping them deep down. Of course they obeyed, but I knew the temptation to watch the fun was getting to them. About 4 times a week, the soldiers would come to my house and train loudly in my backyard. But their training wouldn't last much longer because on the morning of June 17, 1775, the bloody Battle of Bunker Hill began. Nabby and John Quincy, my 2 children that witnessed the battle, were horrified. At least we were safe on a high hill above all the action. The only thing that would have been really dangerous for us was a cannon, but thankfully none of them came anywhere near us. It was dark and hard to see what was happening, but a few times we heard people yelling, "Fire!" Looking at shadows from above, I saw people running from one side of the battlefield to the other. I was scared to death. Think about it. What if America hadn't won? Things would have stayed the same, or maybe even gotten worse. We couldn't let that happen. After hours of watching the battle unfold, huzzah! America had won. I needed to walk my children home because they were very tired. My family and I celebrated for so long. We also invited family and friends to celebrate with us. I was ready to be free from King George III and his incredibly pushy officers. Anyway, without me helping the soldiers train, we may have lost the bloody Battle of Bunker Hill, and we'd still be under British control. The lives of the ladies also changed for the better because of my campaigning for women's rights. Long live American independence.
Hear, hear, fellow patriots. My name is Benjamin Franklin, but you can call me Ben. I was born in Boston, Massachusetts on January 17, 1706, into a family of 19 people. Now you may know me as the man who caught lightning in a bottle. Well, yes, but that's not what I'm going to tell you about today. I was my father's 10th and last son, which made me special. I don't want to brag, but I was very smart for my age. I also helped America win its independence. This is my story. It all started in London, England, in the year 1757. Pennsylvania's government sent me to London on a series of missions. Some colonists began to talk about fighting for independence. Just like many Americans at the time, I wanted America to remain British, but only if we got more rights. I was still in Britain in February 1775, but I failed to help the British and the Americans work out their differences. By that point, I was discouraged and almost lost of hope. Soon after that, I left for America. I reached Philadelphia, and then the Revolutionary War had begun. After returning to the colonies, I was chosen to represent Pennsylvania at the Second Continental Congress. At age 69, I was the oldest member there. Most men my age were retired, but I took on more jobs than I ever had before. It was July 1775, and for a while the Continental Congress tried to make peace and stay calm with Britain. The British disagreed and would not grant us rights as our own nation. I soon realized something I had never realized before. Fighting for America's independence was my only option. In June 1776, Thomas Jefferson began to write a document to declare the colonies free from British rule. I carefully read his work, suggested a few changes, and the Continental Congress approved the Declaration of Independence. The United States of America was now a new nation. It was time to save America's fight for freedom. I traveled to France and told everyone who listened about the American fight for freedom. People agreed to help train American troops. Others gave me money to help. In 1778, France and the United States signed a treaty. The French sent items like soldiers and guns. With the help of the French, America won the Revolutionary War at last. Without me, America wouldn't have had its independence. Thank you all for your time, and long live American independence.
Okay, the redcoats are not coming. Phew, I don't need to use the code. Oh, hi there. Didn't see you. My name is Anna Strong. Did you know that during the Revolutionary War, I was a spy for the General George Washington Hooper spy ring? It was very top secret and dangerous. During this experience, my husband was kidnapped and thrown on a prison ship because the redcoats thought he was a spy. I was left confused and all by myself raising our children. During the Revolutionary War, I faced many challenges, and today I will share about when I was a spy for the Cooper spy ring. One night, I heard a knock at my door. I was all alone with baby Joseph. I was pretty frightened, so I grabbed a gun. My heart was pounding. I was beyond scared. I started to shake. I then slowly opened the door, and I looked up to see it was my neighbor Abraham. I was relieved that it wasn't a stranger. I said, "You scared me to death." Abraham responded and told me, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you, but I have an important letter." We sat down. Abraham shared that Ben, the Reverend's son, needed people to help him find out when the redcoats would be coming through to Long Island. They wanted me to help because my house sits on top of a cliff, so I could easily see when the redcoats were approaching. They wanted me to help, and I was honored that they thought I was perfect for the job. But how could I message him? We needed to devise a plan. That's when I developed a plan to hang laundry. I know what you're probably thinking. How will that help? But let me explain. First, I would plan to hang a black petticoat so Ben knew to pay attention to the message. Then I thought I could use clothespins and handkerchiefs. They would signal the time and which Pacific Cove to meet at. A cove is a protected area, hidden area by the sea. Since there are many coves nearby. The number of handkerchiefs I would hang would determine which cove they would meet at. The redcoats would never catch on. It was just plain old laundry in their eyes. I thought this was a brilliant plan, but I was not sure if it would work. But guess what? The redcoats never found out the code, and I was able to help by giving messages to General George Washington and the Continental Army. I was proud of myself that my plan worked. At the end of the war, I was happily reunited with my husband, Sybil. After he was released from the prison ship, I was so happy that the colonists won and that I played a role in helping the Revolutionary War. I'm proud to be an American.
Hello, fellow patriots. I am Akita Lafayette. I was born on September 6, 1757, in France, and I grew up as an only child. When I was 2, my father died in the 7 Years' War fighting the British. This event had remained with me forever. In 1775, I joined a social group in Paris called the Freemasons. This was a military group, and we would meet to discuss matters such as equality and civil rights. My interest in American independence turned into a desire to join the Patriots as I learned more about their cause. I also liked how a lot of the American leaders, such as George Washington and Benjamin Franklin, shared my beliefs, as they were also members of the Freemasons. At the age of 18, I decided to join the cause of the American Patriots and go to America to fight in the Continental Army. Before I set sail to America, I had sent guns and ships from France to America to help the Patriots. Being from a well-known family like mine, I knew the King of France would not support me going to America. The King secretly supported the Patriots, however did not want to openly support a group fighting Great Britain. I fought in many battles, and today I'm going to tell you about the time I fought in the Battle of Yorktown, which turned out to be the final battle of the American Revolution. It was the year 1781, and the French ships and I had been on the battleground for a few days now. Lord Cornwallis' British troops had been weakened by the battle as well, but he didn't give up. Lord Cornwallis eventually led his troops to the Yorktown Peninsula, thinking that this position would allow the British ships to provide his troops with reinforcements. But we didn't let the British win. The French troops and I decided that we should create a secure blockade with the ships that were in battle with me. Then we went over to where Lord Cornwallis and his troops were. Luckily, we closed in a secure blockade around Lord Cornwallis' troops and him as well. I was able to keep it closed for several days. On October 19, 1781, the British surrendered and the Americans won that battle. After that, many other people who took part in the war believed that America won the revolution. The French troops and I were able to play a key role in helping the American Patriots win the Battle of Yorktown and the Revolution. My support of the American Revolution led to a strengthening of the relationship between France and America. When I returned to France, I continued to work as a supporter of American interests in France. My impact on history is that I fought for liberty in America and then also in my own country. Across America, there are statues in my honor, as well as towns in America carry my name in tribute to the role I played in the fight for American independence. Thank you for your time. Long live American independence.
We're free! Oh, pardon me. Let me introduce myself. I am Elizabeth Friedman, but my sister Lizzie calls me Mumbet. I was an enslaved woman during the time of the Revolutionary War. I was also the first, yes, the first, African-American to successfully file a lawsuit for freedom in the state of Massachusetts. And win! Let me tell you how I was inspired by the Revolutionary War and the Declaration of Independence during my lifetime. I was born in 1744, and let me tell you a little secret. Nobody knows the exact date. I won't tell you now because I want to keep that a mystery. I had a sister named Lizzie and a daughter named Betsy Humphrey. I had a husband, but unfortunately he died at war. I worked for Colonel John Ashley, the richest man in Berkshire County, Massachusetts, and his wife. I hated being enslaved and was treated horribly by Mr. and Mrs. Ashley. I dreamt of being a free and independent woman. One day, during a town meeting, I heard someone mention a document called the Declaration of Independence, which stated all men were created equal and had the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It stuck with me and inspired me to take action. I met with the lawyer, but not just any lawyer. He was Mr. Ashley's lawyer named Theodore Sedgwick, to see if he could help me fight for my freedom. I entered his office and told him, I want to be free. I've got a right to be free. After a lot of convincing, Mr. Sedgwick agreed to take on my case, and we went to court. One hot day in August, Mr. Sedgwick presented my case to the courthouse, explaining although that slavery existed, it was not legal. In fact, according to our new Constitution, it was illegal. After the trial, the jury decided to grant me my freedom, so Lizzie and I packed our bags and got out of there. After that, I was driving forest and ending the trade of enslaved people in the new Commonwealth of Massachusetts when I successfully won my case. After I sued for my freedom, I went to work for the Sedgwick family, for the very same Theodore Sedgwick who helped me win my freedom. I died on December 28, 1829. I was 85 years old at the time and was buried in the Sedgwick family plot. I was the only non-family member to be buried there. Sadly, many enslaved people like myself have experienced similar things. We look forward to a brighter future filled with independence. I hope you enjoyed my story. Long live American independence!
Oh, hello. I didn't see you there. Glamorous, don't I look? Well, greetings, my fellow loyalists, our fellow rivals, the patriots, may think that taxing the colonists was unfair and unnecessary, but they are wrong. Now, I should introduce myself, though you can probably guess who I am. I'm King George III, also known as America's biggest enemy, born June 4th, 1738. I was crowned King George III at the young age of 22. Maybe I should start telling you something interesting about myself. Let's talk about taxes. I purposely taxed the colonists during the Revolution to earn more money for Great Britain's war debts. I should also note, Parliament and I took a long time to think about a lot of plans and taxes, so I would really appreciate it if you did not complain. You might still be wondering why I instated the Sugar Act. Simple. The Sugar Act was instituted to make the colonists pay for sugar and molasses. The purpose of this act was to protect my sugar. Well, back then, 250 years ago, sugar was a precious thing. Not everyone had access to it. I bet you can't even imagine how angry I was when I found out that George Washington and his fancy helpers threw all that precious tea into the Atlantic Ocean. Sure, don't get me wrong, I love tea parties. A nice cup of tea in a nice china cup. Ooh, that's making me thirsty. But this Boston Tea Party was really more like tea torture. Unfortunately, I lost the war. In fact, still a while after the war, it still gets on my nerves. Of course, it wasn't my fault. Well, now that I'm thinking about it, it might have actually been my fault. But don't you understand? I needed more land and money. And even today, some people still think that there was nothing I could do, but I know better. They also called me entitled, but I was just trying to be a good ruler, and it wasn't until that Thomas Jefferson and his perfect Declaration of Independence that he called me a tyrant and unfit to be the ruler of free people. Let me ask you a question. Would you ever say that to a king? Exactly. No, you wouldn't. And when he called me a tyrant, I thought it was the most rude, unfair, unjust, bad-mannered thing anyone had ever said to me. Just note, I would have been a better ruler for the United States than all the presidents put together, especially that fancy George Washington, first president to the United States. Also, Great Britain was and still is the greatest country ever. Get it? Great Britain. Anyway, my wife and children don't know I'm doing this. Maybe I should go, before they start worrying about me. Good luck to Great Britain, and to George Washington, the Patriots, and everyone else. The war is not over yet.